Probably the most famous myth or legend born from the Age of Sail, aside from, of course, mermaids, is without a doubt the Flying Dutchman. Few have endured with the same haunting power as Myth of the Dutchman, or as in certain 21st century Disney cases, made such a spooky impact on children whose parents had no idea what that cool new pirate movie was all about when they took their 5-year-old to see it. My brother didn't sleep for a week. A ghost ship, condemned to sail the sea forever, unable to make port, it's a great yarn, and the Flying Dutchman has drifted through centuries of sailors' lore, literature, and opera, in popular culture as well. But just to put the fish people aside for a moment, stop thinking about the barnacles all over the sails and consider the actual myth. A ghost ship, doomed to sail the seas forever, cursed to never set foot on land again, often seen by sailors right at the end in stormy seas or off dangerous peninsulas. You can kind of see how it stuck around and how it's become connected to sailors whose lives generally were in the hands of a few sheets of wind and planks of wood. But where did the myth come from? And how did it stick around so long? The legend of the Flying Dutchman emerged during the height of European maritime expansion, and this is roughly between the 17th and 18th centuries, namely the period we call the Golden Age of Sail, and really the topic of this channel. Generally speaking, this is a time where European ships began to undertake regular voyages to the far corners of the world. It no longer was a thing of mythology to sail to the Far East like Drake or Magellan. Rather, it was becoming normal, regular even, but still no less dangerous. These extremely long voyages exposed sailors to violent storms, unfamiliar waters, disease, and the constant threat of death. Stuck together for months and months on end, superstition naturally reared its head from time to time, be it a Jonah aboard or a mermaid. If the weather was bad, possibly it was a ghost ship on the horizon. The most common version of the legend, though, centers on a Dutch captain often named Hendrik van der Decken, or Van Straten, or simply the Dutchman, because let's be honest, English sailors trying to speak Dutch was never going to be a faithful translation. Anyway, the story goes that Van Straten attempted to round the Cape of Good Hope during a ferocious storm, but when the weather prevented passage, the captain either cursed God, made a reckless oath, or in some cases, he defies divine warning by swearing he will round the Cape even if it takes eternity. God, being fickle, laughs at him, and as punishment, he and his ship are cursed to sail the seas forever, never allowed to reach harbour or find rest. Now, early references to the Flying Dutchman, specifically, appear in the 18th century travel writings and sailors' accounts. One of the earliest printed mentions is found in John Macdonald's travels in various parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa from 1790, where the ghost ship is described as an ominous apparition seen near the Cape of Good Hope. The account claims the weather was so stormy that sailors said they saw the Flying Dutchman. The common story is that this Dutchman came to the Cape in distress of weather and wanted to get into harbour, but could not get a pilot to conduct her and was lost, and that ever since, in very bad weather, her vision appears. See, it's just another version of the same tale, said again and again and again. There is a bit of reality, though, that a lot of people who live their lives on land don't really understand when it comes to life at sea, and that is sometimes things happen that can't really be easily explained away in any given situation. Think the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Its loss seemed completely insane to anyone on land, a ship so big and strong destroyed by a wave on an inland lake. But if you draw the mystery back, examine it, and then look at it, yes, you can find solutions, you can find how it happened. But consider this, it's not the 21st century, you can't Google things, and you may not be that educated. Superstitions helped sailors make sense of these unpredictable moments. Omens, curses, and ghost stories provided explanations for disasters that otherwise seemed random and cruel. The Flying Dutchman functioned as both a warning and a symbol. To see the ship was to foretell disaster or death. Thus, the legend reinforced the idea that arrogance, blasphemy, or defiance of nature would lead to ruin. And there is some truth in that when it comes to this. Only look at the lifeboat numbers on the Titanic in 1912. Arrogance at sea will kill you. The choice of the Cape of Good Hope as a central location is highly significant too, because it was known for treacherous currents and sudden storms. The Cape was notoriously hazardous for sailors. Many ships were lost there, and there still are lost there, making it fertile ground for ghost stories. The Flying Dutchman, eternally circling this dangerous point, embodied the collective memory of countless maritime tragedies. And like most oral traditions, the legend of the Flying Dutchman has evolved as it's spread. Different cultures and storytellers have emphasized different elements of the myth, and they adapt them to local beliefs and local values. In some version, the captain's crime is pride, challenging God, or even just fate. In others, it's moral corruption, such as murdering a crew member, refusing to aid another ship in distress on the horizon, or trafficking in forbidden goods. Certain tellings add a redemptive element. The curse can be lifted if the captain finds a woman willing to love him faithfully, or if he performs an act of selfless sacrifice. Another variation portrays the Flying Dutchman not as a single ship, but as a class of phantom vessels. Sailors might encounter glowing ships on the horizon, sailing against the wind, or through storms without damage. These apparitions were often explained as the spirits of lost ships, with the Dutchman as their most famous representative. This myth is actually very common in the digital age, in entertainment, as ghost ships, as for example, they play a big role in the game Sea of Thieves, and it's an adaptation of the Dutchman fleet myth. The ship's appearance also varies. Sometimes it's described as blazing with unnatural light, its sails glowing red or ghostly white. In other accounts, it's shrouded in mist, appearing suddenly and then vanishing just as quickly. And of course, Disney turned it into a seafood buffet. But where does the myth match reality? See, while the Flying Dutchman is rooted in myth, some sightings may have some actual natural explanations. One frequently cited phenomenon is the superior mirage, also known as Fata Morgana. This optical illusion occurs when layers of warm and cool air bend light, causing distant objects such as ships to appear elevated, distorted, or floating above the horizon. To an exhausted and superstitious sailor, most likely with very little education, such a sight could easily be seen as supernatural, and given how popular the trade routes became, sighting another ship near the Cape was not a foregone conclusion, let alone on the horizon. Psychological factors also likely played a bit of a role here. Long periods at sea, isolation, malnutrition, and stress could induce hallucinations or heighten suggestibility. In group settings, one sailor's fear could spread to another, and then another, and another, transforming a vague shape on the horizon into a shared vision of a ghost ship through a collective sense of panic or paranoia. Groupthink is a very, very common thing, especially when it comes to paranoia. These explanations don't really diminish the myth at all, though. In fact, they actually kind of enhance it a bit. They show that the human psyche and perception can be shaped by fear and expectation, how groups of people can collectively be convinced that they see something that isn't real. And really, in the area of 24-hour news cycles, these myths really can teach us about how events and things that aren't real can be so easily believed by the average person. At the end of the day, the people who believe this are just as human as you are. Flying Dutchman entered European literature in the early 19th century, and one of the most influential adaptations is Richard Wagner's opera De Vliegende Hollander, The Flying Dutchman in German, from 1843. In Wagner's version, the Dutchman is a tragic figure seeking redemption through love. The opera emphasizes the themes of longing, sacrifice, and salvation, transforming the legend from a cautionary tale into a romantic tragedy. It's from here that the Disney adaptation likely took a lot of its inspiration. Earlier literary treatments, including works by Sir Walter Scott and Heinrich Heine, who helped popularize the story among the educated and higher class audiences, also include these themes. Heine's retelling in particular introduced the idea, though, that the Dutchman could be redeemed by a faithful woman, and this caught on with certain sailors. Naturally, with all this literature going around, visual art also embraced the legend. Painters depicted the ghost ship battling stormy seas, illuminated by lightning or eerie light, and you will have seen some of these images throughout the video. These images reinforce the association between the Flying Dutchman and the sublime mixture of beauty and terror intertwined with divine judgment. It all comes back to divine judgment at the end of the day. At its core, the Flying Dutchman myth is about punishment and consequence. This endless voyage represents the eternal damnation, coming straight from places in the Bible, with religious concepts such as hell and purgatory taking common place here. It really is a form of purgatory. Unlike traditional depictions of hellfire, however, the Dutchman's punishment is isolation and torment, never reaching shore, never resting, and never reconnecting with humanity. Pirates of the Caribbean did that with purgatory. The whole Davy Jones locker is just a form of purgatory. The curse serves as a reminder of nature's supremacy and the danger of hubris, arrogance, and really just being a bit cocky in the face of the ocean. It's really a permanent warning for all those who claim to be able to conquer the ocean. And on a psychological level, the Flying Dutchman embodies that exact fear of being lost, of physicality, spirituality, and mortality. And morally, as well, when you start to look at the adaptations that include women and love and faithfulness. For sailors, you take away all the literary flower. The fear was literal. For readers and audience, it's all metaphorical, representing lives spent chasing unattainable goals, trapped by past mistakes. But for sailors, the thought of being stuck at sea forever is a very literal thing. They could get stuck at sea forever. And in a time where they're most likely going to be Christians, from the European telling, they're going to be stuck at sea forever, eternally damned to float around because they will never be buried. They will never be resurrected until Judgment Day. In modern interpretations, the legend often highlights guilt and redemption. Specifically, though, the idea that the Dutchman might one day be freed suggests a more compassionate worldview, one that allows forgiveness and change. And also, this is possibly taken from Christianity as well, the whole confess your sins and forgiveness thing. This shift, though, does mirror some broader cultural changes, moving away from rigid moral judgment towards empathy and self-reflection. And it's likely connected directly to the fact that this story jumps across Catholic and Protestant lines, blending it in many different ways. In pop culture, though, the enduring appeal of the Flying Dutchman is very evident in its presence. It appears in cartoons, novels, fantasy series, films. It's adapted for new audiences all the time. Sometimes it's treated humorously, stripped of its terror, and other times it's portrayed as dark and ominous, faithful to its origins. Just only look at the version when you have a look at SpongeBob, for example, versus the version when you look at Pirates of the Caribbean. These are probably the two most evident modern adaptations of the Flying Dutchman myth. And these modern versions may alter the details, but the core image remains the same. A ship that should not exist, crewed by the damned, and sailing endlessly. This image continues to resonate because it taps into those universal fears we hold as humans: fear of punishment, fear of isolation, fear of the unknown. And the myth's flexibility allows it to serve different narrative purposes. It can be a moral warning, a tragic love story, a supernatural mystery, an adventurous spectacle. There are not many legends out there, and not many conspiracies out there that do include this much range. And it's not just in the age of sail that it has stuck on. It's not just at sea that it's stuck on. It continues well into the modern age. Only look at, for example, the Australian reality TV show Sea Patrol from the 2000s, which is basically home and away on boats. And there is an episode in the first season where they are discussing ghost ships, specifically the Marie Celeste, but it's linked to the Flying Dutchman as well. They all link it together. Today, as well, it has been transferred off the seas towards things like soccer players, called the Flying Dutchman, because he might be Dutch and he can kick it pretty high in the sky. Or even, get this, Max Verstappen, for the fact he drives a Formula 1 car that is the racing equivalent of a tractor like it's a rocket ship. He is the Flying Dutchman, because he represents the Netherlands, never mind the fact he was born in Belgium. I'm pretty sure he just chose to represent the Netherlands because he grew up culturally Dutch. But because of that, the Flying Dutchman. At the end of the day, whether or not you prefer the SpongeBob variant, the Disney one, or the original with the Eternal Damnation and the Hellfire, it's always important and worth remembering that this ship and the legend, at the end of the day, is one that exists to warn you, and when you're at sea, you are always the lesser of the two evils. So let me know whether or not you enjoyed the story of the Flying Dutchman, and whether or not you would like me to go more into these myths at sea, where they come from, a bit of history about them. For my part this year on the Weevils, I intend to cover more things like I have been covering already, lesser unknown things like the French warship Belle Poule, the Russian ship Mercury, the foundations of the Russian Navy during the Age of Sail, things like that. I also want to cover a bit more when it comes to exploration, like, for example, Matthew Flinders, Abel Tasman, those kind of people. And also, eventually I will do the voyages of James Cook, like I promised, and the Rum Rebellion. But if you like things like this, if you like mythology and you like this kind of stuff, let me know in the comments, and yeah, I can do everything from pirates to, well, other ghost ships and other legends at sea. So, like, comment, subscribe. We do have channel members now active, so if you want to become a member, let me know, and I will catch you all next time.